Hi, Ed.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm great. I just got off a plane. I'm a little bit jet lagged, but yeah, carry on. Looking forward to the,
Good,
the talk.
good, good, good. Um, so I'll begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the land that is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And one thing I wanted, so great. It's great to have so many people here tonight to hear about A Romance of Fairies. Um, Without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to our esteemed fellow secretary of our board, the job that no one ever wants, Ron Jenkins, who has many passions and interests and a depth of knowledge on the history of things waterfront. Some of you may recall his presentation in the you know living memory that he did on the history of the airport lands, and he has come back to us this evening with his Romance of Fairies. Uh, Ron, it is I hand it to you, sir.
Thank you for the introduction. If you don't know me already, I'm, as Edward said, the Secretary of Waterfront for All. I'm also a sailor from National Yacht Club. So I spend a fair bit of time around the waterfront as a recreational user. And along the way, I've just sort of picked up interest in the history of what I see there and so on. So tonight I thought I should maybe talk about the ferries that traverse the harbor and take people over to the island and their history and current state and future, because I think it's all interesting in some way or another. I think most of you, I don't know, you could raise a Zoom hand or something if you have been on any of the Toronto ferries. I imagine probably everybody has been on at least one. Uh, and yeah, there are lots. Yeah. So you can see, I think probably, oh, just take a look at the gallery here and see. Yeah, I see lots of hands. So yes. And anyway, I'm not in a boat. If I were, it would be dark through the portholes. That's your first clue. Anyway, it seems that apparently this is the interior of the boat that was filmed in James Bond's Casino Royale movie. And somehow it ended up for sale, and images of it were put on the marketing site, and somehow I ended up in the cabin. Okay, anyway, let me go ahead to share my presentation so you can take a look at what I'm talking about. I'm hoping that you can see here a ferry traversing the harbor. This is one of the earlier ferries. This one was the Shamrock, and I've noted its dates from 1880 to around 1905. This is one of the typical ferries of the 19th century with its little octagonal wheelhouses up on the top, and these were all wood construction. Side wheel paddle boats powered by steam. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the peninsula and its team boats. The peninsula is because I'm speaking of that because the island was not always an island, and I think you might already know that. But at one point, you'd cross a bit of the Don River and walk along a sandbar on the edge of a marsh called Ashbridges Bay, and get to the island. The team boats, if you didn't know it, or if you're not familiar with the term, this is not a Toronto Island team boat, but it's very much like the Toronto Island team boats, powered by a team of horses. So you can see a pair of horses here standing on treadmills, and they would have turned the paddle wheels. This one happens to be one that was on the Mississippi River as late as 1907. But Toronto's team boats were much earlier, and the design of team boats often used a kind of a turntable that went through a gearing mechanism to turn the paddles. This is an image of Sir John of the Peninsula, the first of the ferries across in Toronto Harbour. And it was in 1833. And as you can see, it was also a team boat, pair of horses there. A little bit later, the Peninsula Packet started running across over to the Peninsula Hotel. And this one is a 5 horsepower team boat. The Peninsula Hotel was one of the early hotels on the island, and it was equipped with entertainments, including big swings and a merry-go-round and a bowling alley over here, and a menagerie here with reindeer and raccoons, apparently, and bears, whatever they could grab for the thing. And there were entertainments on the island, including hunting entertainments and things like that. I have a description of one of the entertainments here, saying there was yet one another occasional diversion, equally reprehensible, but perhaps not quite so cruel as the one just mentioned, which was turkey shooting. This was shooting a bear with a candle. A bear was purchased, and 40 years ago, these were not difficult to obtain, and a man resident in Toronto used to give an exhibition of shooting this animal with a rifle, ostensibly loaded only with an ordinary tallow candle. To see this performance, a small sum was charged, and those who witnessed it went away believing the bear had met his quietus solely through the force of the candle striking him. They were not told, and probably would not have believed it had they been so, that when the candle was put in the rifle, a bullet had preceded it. Nevertheless, such was the case. This sport always took place in the winter, and there was from time to time an occasional fox hunt also, fox being let loose the night before to furnish the sport, and a very exhilarating amusement was the result. So we're talking about an island at the time, much of a wilderness, but with entertainment value even then. And I mean, interesting that it has always been kind of a little bit of both. But in 1858, a storm opened what is now called the Eastern Gap. And what was a peninsula, it became an actual island and a set of islands. You can see here at the same time that sandbar that people would have walked down here now doesn't get you across. So that was a bit of an inducement to further ferry business. And what happened was a whole bunch of independent ferry system operators. They began as individuals operating their own ferries and started to form into companies. So there were groups like the Humber River Ferry Company, which goes a little outside our parameters here, but it took people out and over to the Humber River, where there were hotels and things like that. Easier to get to the Humber River by boat than by road at the time. The Turner Ferry Company and Timon's Island Ferry Company and Doty, all of them ended up consolidating over the years, and from the 1880s to 1927, they were all operating under one name as the Toronto Ferry Company. And in 1927, the Toronto Ferry Company was acquired by the city and became part of the Toronto Transportation Commission, which is now our TTC. The TTC eventually sold the ferry operations off, or passed the ferry operations off to the Metro Parks and Toronto Parks Department, is who operates it now. This was one of the ferries that went down to the Humber River. It's mentioned in the earlier page, but it ended up over on Parry Sound. This was just the only picture I could find of that particular vessel. Again, it's got that octagonal wheelhouse. And the things that hang down the sides there are fenders. These are some of the smaller ferries running on the Humber River at the time. And this is a partial and incomplete list of ferries that were operating through from the early, 1830s until the modern era. And you can see that eventually a lot of these boats ended up becoming parts of the Toronto Ferry Company, and ultimately were purchased into the TTC. This is typical of the boats that were running at the time, the Bouquet, with its octagonal wheelhouse, side wheel paddles, wood hull construction, and it was also a side loading ferry here. So if you were docked, people were coming and leaving from the side of the ferry. Hanlon's Point and the other destinations across the waterfront had regular ferry service. This is a timetable of steamers in 1885, and you can see that they were leaving every 15 minutes, either leaving from York or Yonge or Brock Street, and the ferries leaving. There were 6 ferries in this timetable: the Sadie, the Queen City, the Luella, the Geneva, the John Hanlon, and the Ada Alice. I tried to track some of these down. I got a little bit of information on some of them. The Queen City left Toronto after a little while and went down and operated on the Niagara River between Queenston and Lewiston. The Luella ran for quite a long time on the harbor. You can see here it's listed as Toronto Transportation Commission. Although it started running in 1882, it was one of the boats that passed through that transition into the TTC in 1927. And it went as long as 1934, although by the time it got to 1934, it was a bit of a derelict and got vandalized, and it was eventually burned by people who thought it was firewood. So it ended up burned that way. The Geneva, I have a picture of this vessel called Geneva on the Trent Canal, and I'm not sure if it's the same one as in the 1885 timetable of ferries, but it might well be. And the John Hanlon was a familiar vessel on the waterfront. Its dates, as you can see, lead it from 1884 to 1927. In this image, you can see it also says on the bow there above Toronto Transportation Commission, small sign says to Lakeside Home. The Lakeside Home was a sanitarium for children on the island near what's now Gibraltar Point. And I won't go into the details of that, but it's an interesting piece of Toronto history. You can see the children on board here. And this ferry would travel up into where the water treatment plant is on the island now. And here's another picture of the same vessel, and then a picture of it aflame. And the reason it was aflame was basically kind of the TTC's policy at the time to dispose of ships that were no longer working or suitable for operation. And when they bought the fleet of vessels from the Toronto Ferry Corporation, a lot of them were, as this one, a wood hull and not in very good condition. Probably wasn't their best financial decision, but they did take advantage of by making entertainment for people at Sunnyside by burning the ferries as entertainment. So that's the John Hanlon and the John Hanlon in its last moments there in 1929. The Ada Alice met a different end. It ended up in Muskoka, and eventually was waterlogged and sank and abandoned. The Jasmine was another one of the ferries that the TTC acquired, and you can see its date is also terminating in 1929. It burned. It was burned, not it burned, but it was burned as part of the Sunnyside Entertainments. And the Clark Brothers, this boat was called Clark Brothers. It was also owned by Clark Brothers. And I kind of like this image of the ferry coming into the docks, south wind blowing coal smoke up into the city, as so many images of the waterfront at the time show. Here's the same Clark Brothers ferry at the Wards Island dock, Clark Brothers here. It's offloading post toasties to the islanders. So these ferries were not simply passenger ferries, but also carrying freight. And the Clark Brothers ferry was also another one of the ferries torched at Sunnyside, accompanied by fireworks and so on. Another one of the ferries, and this shows a bunch of kids on board, was owned by the Clark Brothers as well. It was the Elsie. It was it was not a paddle wheeler, but a single screw propulsion. And it ended up as a tugboat in Georgian Bay not long after this picture was taken. The TJ Clark lasted longer than most of these. It went as long as 1950 and or 59, I'm sorry. And it started as a fireboat and a cargo vessel and ended up doing passenger service and returned as a freighter. And it had steam engines created by Polson Iron Works, which was a shipping and construction company on the Toronto waterfront, a significant one. Its appearance changed over the years, which is why I put that little thumbnail down in the bottom right corner. In 1958, it didn't look quite the same as it had in its earlier days. In the background here, though, you can also see the Bluebell. 1959, and you can see a bit of the terminal warehouse up in the corner there too. So that gives you an idea where the ferry docks were at the time. And this is an early photo of an unknown vessel. The archive document says it's the Ada Alice, but it doesn't look like the Ada Alice in any way that matches the Ada Alice images that otherwise say Ada Alice on them. These ferries and others all docked across the waterfront. And again, you can see the smoky city. We have in the foreground here the Mayflower, and back over here would be the Primrose. These other vessels might not have been island ferries, but excursion vessels taking people from the Toronto waterfront to destinations like Hamilton, Niagara, Rochester, Oswego, Kingston, Cobourg, and so on around Lake Ontario. And if you didn't notice with the bouquet and the shamrock names, the naming system for the ferries was often using wildflower names. And in particular, a group of ferries were the wildflower ferries, the Mayflower and Primrose, which we just saw in the previous slide, and the Bluebell and Trillium. The Mayflower operated from 1890 to 1938, and after its time as a ferry, it was converted into a barge. Not an uncommon end for these ferries. But these were the monster ferries of the time. At 1900, these were the biggest ferries operating. The Primrose and the Mayflower were twins, built the same place, built the same time. and operating until very close to the same end, converted into barges. Here's another shot of the Mayflower or the Primrose, I'm sorry. And I had one document that said that it was put into a Sunnyside fireworks display, but everything else I see says it was converted into a barge, and I can't actually find anything that definitive about either of those ends for this ferry. The ferries that came along after were bigger still. The Bluebell, this is the Bluebell being launched from Polson Iron Works in 1906. The top sides would have been finished after launch, obviously. These were steel-hulled, as were the Mayflower and Primrose, steel-hulled ferries, side paddle wheel ferries, coal-fired steam engines. And the Bluebell looks very much like its twin, the Trillium, which you will know. The Bluebell operated from 1906 to 1955. And there it is loading passengers for Center Island in 1932. Sort of midway through its life. And here it is being converted into a scow in 1957. And today, if you want to find the Bluebell and you have a boat, you can go through the eastern channel, the eastern gap, and into the outer harbor. And on this headland, I've zoomed in here you can look on Google Maps, satellite view, you'll see the hull of the Bluebell lodged there. It was used as kind of erosion control. And when the water's low, you can actually see the shape of the boat. The Trillium has an interesting history, operating from 1910 to 1957, much like the Bluebell. But then the plans to turn it into a barge were never really executed, so it was towed over to the island lagoons near the water treatment plant and abandoned until 1976. So here it is in 1960, rotting in the lagoons with a bunch of students. I don't know whether they're talking about ferries or whether they're talking about something else on the island. By 1972, it was in worse shape still. As you can see, it was submerged. People would kayak or canoe through it. It had been stripped for a lot of parts. But it was restored and went back into operation. So in 1974, the restoration began. They changed and took away whatever couldn't be continuously used. And it went back into operation in 1976. This is it in operation in the 80s. It showed up as a stamp in 2023. And here it is last year sleeping under tarpaulins. It's now down in dry dock in Hamilton. The city says they believe they're going to be bringing it back into service, but it's a little unclear what its future is. It would certainly be a shame, though, to lose this thing. It's more than 100 years old and still works. But they do need to move it to do work on the docks. So to get over to the ferries, or to get onto the ferries, you would enter through one of various terminals. This one was one of the early ones. Other ones were less formal, but this was operating until 1918. You can see also here, there's also a signed ferry for the lakeside home. The island park was actually Center Island. Hanlon's Point was a major entertainment site with a ball stadium and amusement park. And Ward's Island was as Ward's Island is today. So this terminal is located on the east side of the Toronto Harbour Commission building that is still sitting in place at Bay and Harbour Streets today. So it's sitting on waterfront that now no longer exists as waterfront. It then moved a little further south as the lake filling changed the shoreline along the central waterfront. And this was the terminal location from 1918 to 1972. You can see a couple of ferries sitting there. They would be the Bluebell and the Primrose. Sorry, Mayflower and the Primrose sitting there at the foot of Bay Street. The current ferry terminal started in 1972. It's now the Jack Layton Ferry Terminal. It's about 100 meters to the east of the previous terminal, so it moved back. And I put in a little thumbnail of the crowds attending to get onto a ferry. One of the major criticisms of the ferry terminal and the ferries generally is they're crowded. There is a proposal for a new ferry terminal. This is an architectural plan from Greenberg Consultants, and Ken Greenberg was one of the city planners at the time and an architect. So this terminal design would use the roof of the terminal as a park area, and people would access the ferries from under that roof. So on the roof, it would be kind of like a little bit of a park with, in the scheme of things, that girl is catching pigeons, or I don't know what she's doing. Anyway, the current ferry docks in this view is what things look like now. And change is always happening. So this shot is a little bit out of date. As you can see, Captain John's Restaurant is still there. The Trillium is here, and a couple of the newer ferries are sitting in their slips. I just saw a proposal that maybe the Toronto Star building will be turned into a hotel. We'll see about that, I guess. Another terminal is not related to the city operations, but to the airport operations, which is the ferry terminal operating at Billy Bishop City Airport, Toronto City Airport. The Wards Island Ferry Dock is a single slip dock. And here's an image of it at night, or in winter under ice. The other docks have 2 and 3 slips. Center Island has 2, Hanlan's has 3. That reflects the volume of traffic earlier in the century when, earlier in the 20th century when Hanlan's was the busiest location on the Toronto waterfront. So looking at the current city fleet, and this is not the current city fleet anymore, but it was in 1952. The major vessels being the Trillium, Sam McBride, Thomas Rennie, Bluebell, and the William Inglis is not shown here, but there they are sitting in their slips. This is a representation of things in 1972, and the fact is almost nothing has changed. That is, this is the new ferry terminal. This is the Thomas Rennie, the Sam McBride, the William Inglis, and the Anguilla. The Anguilla being the city's vehicle carrying vessel as well as passengers. So it's got a bed that can carry numerous vehicles, and then it goes over to Hanlan's typically. It's also got a little bit more ice breaking capacity than the other ferries. What you can see here is that Thomas Rennie and the Sam McBride are very similar vessels. They're not similar exactly in age, but they are very similar in size and design. The William Inglis is the earliest of these and the smallest. The William Inglis launched originally as the Shamrock, and this is a different Shamrock than was in the first slide in this presentation. but it was almost immediately renamed to the William Inglis on the death of William Inglis, the well-known city industrialist. You may recognize that name in terms of dishwashers and things like that. So that ferry still operates, but it started operations for the city in 1935. So we're talking about a 90-year-old boat now. There's the William Inglis again, traveling through the harbor in a photo from about 2013. The Sam McBride came along 4 years later, much larger than the William Inglis, and still operates. And the Thomas Rennie came along in 1951. And like the Sam McBride, still operates. And there it is, the Angara. The airport, the island airport, has its own history of ferries. And although scows and barges were the usual end for ferries, or one of the ends, this is actually a scow with a success story, because it was a scow before it was a ferry. This is the first Toronto Island Airport ferry, and it's pictured here in 1951. It started operating when the airport started operating in 1938. And it never got any better name than Airport Ferry, as you can see on the side. Airport Ferry, Toronto. And the other thing to notice, and I've circled it in the picture here, is that there's a traffic light above the ferry. This is because the ferry was, as it says here, a cable ferry. What it means is essentially it had no propeller. It was pulled back and forth across the Western Gap by a cable that, when the ferry was sitting in its slip, would release slack into the cable, and the cable would sink down and boats could go back and forth. But when the ferry was in operation, that cable would tighten up, come up out of the water, and stretch right across the gap. So you were not going to try and take a shortcut in front of the ferry, or you could, I guess, if you were crazy. In the background, you can see the Royal York here, and the soya mills that were torn down in the 1980s. For a short time, this ferry operated as an interim ferry on the airport. It was the J.G. Langton. It was built in 1934, and it operated for about a season as the Island Airport Ferry. Apparently, it still exists as a private tugboat somewhere up in the Georgian Bay area. We're getting a little more into the modern era for the island ferries, but modern in only a relative sense. This is the Maple City, which operated for the island airport from 1965 until 2006. So in the background, you can see the airport terminal in this shot. 2005 is the old airport terminal that now sits at the south end of the airport property. The Maple City, if you notice, was built in 1951. So the TPA, the Toronto Port Authority, did not get this ferry as a new ferry. They got it from actually Prescott, down on the St. Lawrence River. There it is, the Maple City in Prescott. Prescott's nickname is the Maple City. So that ferry carried passengers across the St. Lawrence River down to across to Ogdensburg, which is on the American shore. And This is a picture I took in 2004. The Maple City went out of service in 2006 and has been sitting on the dock walls around the waterfront since then, flaking paint and getting rustier. I don't know if it will ever do anything again, but the Port Authority has not taken it off the books or disbanded it or whatever. So it still sits there for people to admire. The other ferry that operated in a similar time frame was the Maple City. It started in 1985 and went again until 2006. This picture is a 1987 photo. The Windmill Point was also built much earlier in 1954. And it was another one of Prescott's ferries. The name Windmill Point relates to this tower. So the windmill, somebody's got an echo running. If you could mute. So this windmill doesn't look like a windmill now. It looks like a lighthouse, but it was a windmill in 1832. There was a battle fought there, the Battle of the Windmill in 1838. It was converted to a lighthouse in 1872. This was the Battle of the Windmill was part of the Upper Canada Rebellion, and aftermath of that, when a group of rebels, American rebels, were trying to turn Upper Canada into a republic, unsuccessfully. But the Windmill Point operated again between Prescott and Ogdensburg. And this is a period. I couldn't get a better image of this, I'm sorry, but this is a depiction of the Battle of Windmill Point happening on the St. Lawrence River in 1838. And you can look this up and find out the history. It's kind of interesting. The Windmill Point ended up mothballed like the Maple City. This picture is approximately 2015. Again, so it was already, by this point, 10 years out of service. And another 10 years probably flaked a lot more paint off it. So that's the history of the Windmill Point. I don't know where it is now, but it's somewhere apparently still around in the Toronto area. If you look on Google Street Maps, or sorry, Google Satellite View and Google Maps, you can see both the Windmill Point and the Maple City docked along in either the Keating Cut or in the shipping channel, depending on which satellite photograph was taken when. Down in Prescott, though, the bridge was built across the Prescott-Ogdensburg Bridge. It opened in 1960 and spanned the St. Lawrence River with room for ships to pass beneath. That ended ferry traffic at that location. Ferry traffic that had run from 1815 between the two towns. You build a bridge and you don't need a ferry anymore. The Island Airport got rid of the Maple City and the Windmill Point and put this ferry into service with the original name of TCCA-1, which stood for Toronto City Centre Airport 1. The not very original naming scheme. Then they went with the name of a World War II fighting ace, David Hornell. And I won't go into a sidetrack there to describe that history, but it's kind of interesting too. So this now is actually the backup ferry for the airport. The current major operating ferry is the Maryland Belle 1. It started in 2010. It was converted to electric power in 2021 and continues to operate. concurrent with the tunnel that's there. There have been other ferry ideas. This is one that is in kind of a limbo. This is the Dartmouth 3 that started down in Halifax, Dartmouth, ran back and forth there. A location that's had ferries actually since 1757, and I thought I'd show a Halifax steamboat ferry as an example of that. That ferry, the Dartmouth 3, was brought from Halifax to Toronto about 8 years ago, and has not had a successful operation here since then. It seems that maybe the planning was not put into place properly for it to have a landing point on the island. It's not designed to land at the current docks on the island, which are for end loading ferries. This one is a side loading ferry, and I don't know if the city would even have allowed that, but as you can see, it's currently its blue is fading, and it seems to apparently have recently developed a list. So it's just sitting tied up there for a while near the fire station, and then moved to another slip. Here's another idea that this is a mock-up photograph, so don't be fooled, but it was a proposed route to go from the central waterfront through the Western Gap and down into the Humber Bay Park right there. This was proposed in 2019, hasn't happened yet. It's a proposal coming from a water taxi service. Other ferries to the island are the yacht clubs and marinas tenders. The Island Yacht Club has the Johnny C. I don't know who Johnny C is. I haven't been able to find that information. Queen City Yacht Club has the Algonquin Queen 2, replacing an earlier boat. That's still in operation today. Toronto Island Marina has the Island Mariner. And it also has the P&P 1, which I'm informed was purchased by Toronto Island Marina from Property and Parks Toronto, which is why it's called P&P. The RCYC has a couple of quite interesting launches, ferries. The Hiawatha being one of the oldest vessels operating anywhere in the world in service like this. The Hiawatha started in 1895 and continues to be one of the two standard ways of getting to the Royal Canadian Yacht Club. The other is a slightly newer vessel, slightly larger, the Quassind. Quassind started in 1912 and built at Polson Ironworks, which is the same ironworks that manufactured the Bluebell and the Trillium. The RCYC also has a couple of other vessels, the Esperanza and the LCD, that serve multiple purposes but do ferry passengers in off seasons to the island. But there is a history of ferries and shipbuilding in Toronto that I think is interesting. I've put red dots at the locations where they existed at the time. And you can see, if you're going from the left there, the Doty Bertram, and it had other names as well. Manufacturing operation, they manufactured boilers, steam engines, ships engines, and ships. They're the builders of the Mayflower, the Primrose, and the Hiawatha. Where they're located made sense at the time because they could launch boats there, but you can see how much lake filling has happened across the Toronto waterfront since then. The same for Polson Ironworks that built the Bluebell, the Trillium, and the Quassind. The Polson Ironworks location doesn't exist anymore, but it's inland of the shoreline. And then Toronto Dry Dock, there have been other names for other places called Toronto Dry Dock, but the Toronto Dry Dock built the William Inglis, the Sam McBride, and the Thomas Rennie. So out of this group, they represent a certain amount of the shipbuilding that was happening in the Toronto Harbour in the 1800s and into the mid 1900s. So these were major ferries all built in Toronto. And I've mentioned them already, but you can go down the side here. It's the Mayflower, the Primrose, and the Bluebell. All the Mayflower, Primrose, and going into the center there, Hiawatha were all built by the same manufacturer. The Bluebell, the Trillium, and the Quasend were built by Polson Iron Works. And then the major ferries running today from 1935, 39, and 51, they were all built by the Toronto Dry Dock Company, located on what's now the Keating Cut, where the Don River flows, or until recent times, flowed into Toronto Harbour. But then you have a future, the Toronto Island Electric Ferries, City of Toronto. This is a rendering of what these ferries will look like in a photorealistic imagining, showing two ferries, which will be the two ferries that will be delivered to the city. And this describes the plan. The Anguera, the vessel ferry from 1963, currently carries 216 passengers and 10 cars with some space for trucks. The new ferry that will replace it will carry 615 passengers and 14 cars, or if it has no vehicles, it can carry 1,300 passengers, which is more than any of the current ferries. Its plan is to arrive here in late fall 2026. The William Inglis, which is the smallest and oldest of the current operating group of ferries, carries nearly 400 passengers, and its replacement will carry 1,300. And it's intended to arrive in spring 2027. The other two ferries, the Sam McBride and Thomas Rennie, are expected to carry passengers and continue into operation for maybe another 10 years. And there isn't a specific plan for that. I won't describe the benefits of the new ferries other than, for example, they'll be able to more quickly load and unload passengers, carry more passengers, and in greater comfort. But the replacement for the Anguera will look like that. They're going to retain the style of the original or the current Toronto Island ferries in the look. And this Anguera replacement, again, arriving late next year, is designed to operate in ice, which is important for maintaining current year-round access to the island. And it will have triple the passenger capacity of the Anguera, which I've put a little shot in the corner there. The other replacement ferry will be replacing the William Inglis, which is the first of the three similar looking ones, but the smallest of these. So it's the 400 passenger ferry, and it will be replaced by one that can carry up to 1,300 passengers. So that's a more than threefold increase in capacity for that ferry. Really, we can't end up talking about how people get to the island without talking about the water taxis, which have taken up a lot of the slack and zip back and forth at speed in the harbor all the time. These ones are called the water taxi, W''OTTER. And if you remember the Ottoman Empire, this is the plan here for water taxis. These ones leave from the foot of Yonge. Waterfront Toronto conducted a marine use strategy report in 2020. It was updating an earlier report, and it includes a sketch of the existing marine transportation routes. So this line is the Island Yacht Club ferry, the the Johnny C. F5 to F6 is the Island Airport ferry. These lines are running out to Toronto Island Marina and Queen City Yacht Club. And the RCYC ferries run out from the shipping channel over to RCYC. And then the Jack Layton Ferry Terminal here operates routes to Hanlon, Center Island, and Wards like that. A future vision for what could be the way ferries operate adds a bunch of new lines. As you can see, it includes future potential to Ontario Place, future potential from Portland Quay over to Parliament Street and into the area around Okwayman-Minising, this new island here. And another one maybe going from Okwayman-Minising out and around to the outer harbor, and maybe even routes out along the outer side of the Center Island and Wards Beach. An update to the Marine Use Strategy Report also looks at sea bus concepts, which are a little bit different from ferries. They might be more like a commuter vessel. And these are sea buses operating in New York. They're called water taxis, but they don't look like the water taxis that we see in Toronto. These are enclosed vessels. And next year, you might see one of these being tested out in Toronto. This is an electric-powered hydrofoiling passenger vessel with a capacity of, I think, about 25 people. These are already in operation, manufactured by a Swedish company. And it might be quite interesting as something to operate routes in and around the harbor and maybe stretching a little further afield. As far as these sea bus routes, concepts describe things like going from Ontario Place to the Portland Slip, Harbourfront, Yonge, Parliament, and Okwayman-Minising. And then looking down the road further from now into 25, 35 routes that would go outside the island, Outer Harbor Marina, and points along the waterfront that are not served now. Part of this might be to offload some of the congestion, because right now all the city ferries come and go from one point, the Jack Layton Ferry Terminal. And it would be, I think, beneficial to everybody to actually have a more sort of distributed design. I won't bore you with the references, but I will thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Well, thank you, Ron. We do have some questions already. And I will. So I'm just going to quickly go before we ask people to put up their hands or say things like that. I've got some questions right here. So one person asked about whether or not with the new ferry terminal routes would be going elsewhere. You've sort of essentially answered that question in terms of what's being conceptualized, but no decisions have been made. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Someone else asked, how do the names of some of the classic ferries and ones that are still operating get selected? Do you have any knowledge of
Okay,
that?
well, yeah, I mean, there was a history of naming the ferries after wildflowers, the shamrock, the bluebell, and all that. More recently, the city ferries were named after civic figures. So the William Inglis was named after a well-known industrialist who just died. The Sam McBride was a city mayor, and the Thomas Rennie was a TTC commissioner. How might the city name its new ferries? I would think that they would maybe want to have a competition. I would throw out the name David Crombie for one of those ferries. That's my my view as a mayor who's done a lot for the waterfront of the city, and being engaged and avoided, I think, scandal. So, but I don't know, maybe it would be Ferry McFerry face as far as it goes. I mean, we don't know.
Let's not have that. Let's not do that. Um,
If you ask a question, you have to be prepared for the answer, right?
um, yeah. Um, or the Rob Ford crack boat.
That that could be, yeah, that could
Um,
be.
Probably best we don't go there. Do you know anything about the Candela P12 testing in Toronto? Do you know anything about that? Does that mean anything to you? It was a question
Um,
that popped up.
Ed might have a little bit of information. He's had a little bit of contact with the Candela people.
Ed?
I don't know a lot. There was the Candela apparently does exist as a sort of prototype, and there's a number of models that I guess are sold already. And I was actually at the talk that we gave at Ukuman Minising about the plants and stuff, and a guy came up to me and said, "Hey, let's have lunch." And he sent me a bunch of promotional materials, and apparently they would like to have a boat running and kind of giving people rides, I guess, during the FIFA World Cup. I have no idea where it would dock. I've said, uh, let's meet and talk about it, and we'll just see what happens. I guess it seems kind of neat. Might go fast. I guess it could go further afield. It could kind of zoom around different places, and apparently wouldn't make a lot of wake. And so, like, who knows? We'll see. But so there's a number of ideas floating around. There's the hovercraft idea also, which is a bit different from ferry in that it would go right across the lake. But there's a lot of people with a lot of ideas, I think would be fair to say.
Oh, speaking of ideas, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I just switched headphones because my other ones were really comfortable. So Ron mentioned sea buses. This, of course, is a Vancouver sea bus. These go across Burrard Inlet from North Vancouver from downtown Vancouver to North Vancouver, and they are fully integrated into the Greater Vancouver Transit System, TransLink, and they run like I don't know every 10 minutes or so at peak, and about every 20 minutes at other times of day, from the waterfront station terminal to Lonsdale Quay. And of course, they are also, oh my God, Toronto Ferry Heresy, they are also side loading boats. People go in these doors here, and they exit on one side. And they're double loaded, side loading docks at each side of the harbor, and people enter on one side and exit on the other. So that's something. I mean, Burrard Inlet, can get pretty rough, and these boats can manage in fairly rough weather. I mean, occasionally, sea bus service has been canceled, but very, very rarely. Of course, Burrard Inlet doesn't freeze, so that's something.
One thing I forgot to mention about the new ferries is that there seems to be a controversy that has just cropped up regarding the shipbuilder chosen for this project. The company is called Damen Shipbuilding. They're in the Netherlands. The ships are being constructed in Romania, but apparently Damen is being charged with facing prosecution for bribery, forgery, and hi Teddy, and and
Forgive
violating.
me. Sorry, just for program notes. Sorry, forgive me. I'm gonna listen, but I'm just gonna step away because I think Teddy would like to go outside, so I'm just gonna let him
Okay.
outside. So I'm not leaving. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
Anyway, apparently the controversies surrounding that shipbuilding company, things to do with Russian sanctions and shipping stuff to Russia, anyway, are not supposed to affect the Toronto Island Ferries order. The controversies appear to relate to periods from 2006 to 2017, so maybe it's not that relevant. We will find out, but I hope we don't find out the hard way. As far as the candelas go, I think there are about 40 of them in operation in spots around the world. Um, I can see a little bit of discussion about side loading versus end loading ferries. I think it's probably academic as long as the ferry docks are designed to do one or the other properly. But if you do want to have a double-ended ferry, because in Toronto Harbour, there's no real space to turn a ferry around. When you look at some of the earlier ferries, they were not double-ended ferries. And they are all that way now. So that's one thing.
Ed and Ron, when we were talking about the marine use study and also the plans for the Portlands and Aquaman missing, if there were to be a ferry that docked there somewhere thereabouts, what was the location? What's the location for a potential ferry terminal there that was being discussed?
I haven't seen anything, so I don't know.
I mean, I guess what I can say is can you go back to that slide, the one that shows there's the routes that go along the lake and the ones that kind of go around from the island, actually from the island marina.
1 second.
Discussed in the recent consultant study. And it's interesting, I guess, to, speculate, this kind of thing. So this is interesting to me. I was on this committee and gave some comments on it, and I'd be interested in what other comments other people might have. My personal view was that it would be quite a while before a route along the city sort of waterfront would make sense. In other words, the one that we see going from Ontario Place to Portland Slip, Harbourfront Center, and so on, because it seems to me that for the foreseeable future, if you want to go along Queens Quay or something, you're going to go, by streetcar or some other way. And it seems to me to be kind of doubtful that will be required. But what did seem to me to be interesting about the other route, which is the one shown with dotted lines, was the idea that there would be some some access point on the mainland that would go over to the ferry. In fact, there might be two access points, one at the Outer Harbour Marina and the other at Ontario Place. Now, I had written letters over the years and sort of agitated on behalf of Yorkey Neighborhood Association for the idea that at least in the long term, there should be more than one place to leave from the city in a ferry. Because right now we only have one spot. It seems to be, from Ron's talk, it's a kind of it's a traditional thing going back at least 100 years, maybe 150 years, that you have one access spot basically on the city side, and they have three spots to access the island. And that's just how we've done it. And we've always done it that way, at least going, way back a long way. And is it time to think about that? And one of the reasons I guess I have always thought that is that I happen to live right opposite the Jack Layton Ferry dock right now. I live at the foot of Bay in condo building, and the congestion on a summer weekend is a little bit crazy. And we're also about to have a huge amount of construction right down there as they build, an underground tunnel for the eastbound LRT and all this kind of stuff. And the burden on that sort of one intersection there is very considerable and looks likely to get a lot worse. So I've always thought that at some point the city should start to look about another spot. And the one that I had always thought was good was not so much the Outer Harbour Marina as the Eastern Gap, right around where the ferries, the packets, I guess, whatever they're called, the ones that go over to RCYC go from, somewhere over here. You can't, yeah, where your hand is, sort of there, or maybe on the side here, or something like that, which is kind of land that's not really used very much, it seems. There is, in fact, there's what's called the cruise ship terminal there. Is that a good use? I don't know. There's a lot of disused land there, and that just seemed to me to be better. It would be accessible to the Don Valley, fairly easy to get to. There's potentially a lot of parking. One of the problems with the Jack Layton Center is that the parking is a bit of a challenge. There's nowhere really to stop if you want to, let out Granny and you've got picnic wagon and kids, who knows what. Then it can be a very tough spot to kind of unload stuff. So I don't know. I just throw that out for what it's worth. Um, Port Toronto is probably not anxious to give up that land or to donate it to. There's for example a movie studio has been built or upgraded in the last 5 or 10 years,
Right.
right on that spot uh, by Ports Toronto. I don't know if we need a movie studio there right now. It's a big concrete building, no view of anything. The Outer Harbor Marina, it seems kind of far away. So I don't know. I throw that out for anybody to think about. The idea of going from Ontario Place, and of course we're going to see an Ontario Place redeveloped and changed in ways that not everybody likes, but the idea that that might be a drop off or an access point on the city side, I think has some merit. So I don't know. That to me, it was actually the not the what's shown as a solid line here, but the more dotted line that shows other access points from the city that I regarded as kind of interesting, but others might have different opinion.
Well, the point's just been made about the Keating Channel, but I think the Keating Channel is a bit tight, right? It's a bit tight, and there's all those
It
bridges
might
there
be a bit,
now.
it's the Parliament slip. Again, these are
Yeah,
places that probably are a bit tight. Parking is difficult, that kind of thing.
but
Uh,
seemingly, I mean, so I take your point from, we just take, as you say, if we just take a sort of if we just sort of ignore what our feelings for a moment on what may be happening in Ontario Place, but just think of it as a location and close to the CNE, etc. That would seem to be an obvious one, and per your point, somewhere in the Portlands, whether it's the Ship Channel, whether it's Oquaminising, somewhere there, east and west and center seems to be a fairly obvious. Like three and three seems to be an obvious thing.
or the turning basin, somebody has said, so that's sort of
Yeah,
interesting as well. The turning basin is not a place that people regard as accessible too much right now. Most of us maybe haven't even hardly been there. It's interesting, there's all sorts of possibilities for the turning basin and for the ship channel generally, which is a body of water that the people of Toronto have not had a lot of access to over the years. But I think as things develop, we'll start to sort of be more familiar with it as a place to go and as a launching spot to get out on the harbor and to get to the island and things like that. So that
but
might be a good idea.
and I will point out for those people who don't necessarily go down there, and I will say, I will confess that I have driven a motor vehicle down there because my youngest, who's now off at university, was a soccer player, and many, many, many times he would go to play it down at Cherry Beach, the soccer, which is those lovely soccer fields down there, which are not relative. I mean, you can take a bus down to Cherry Beach in the summer, and you still have about a kilometer walk, which isn't going to kill you, but it's just time and connection. So yeah, and if you're taking a bunch of boys, you often go, or young women, you often wind up driving there. And I will tell you that in the summertime, believe it, Unwin. By the soccer fields at Cherry Beach Park itself, and farther east, going to out to the Spit, the traffic, both pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicular, is intense already.
Yeah.
It's already really quite. It's not as crushing as a peak, Jack Layton Ferry Terminal. I grant you, in one, like which is in one spot. It's already busy, but it is pretty intense. I mean, I know that as part of the ongoing improvements to Tommy Thompson Park, Leslie Spit, one of the, besides the improved pathways, there is a small parking lot there. And if you go down there on a pleasant weekend, um, it is jammed, rammed. There isn't a space to be had.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, we've got a lot of ports, Toronto land over here, and we do have some shipping, and that's a good thing. We got, sand and salt and things. Uh, the issue might have to be asked eventually, well, how much land is needed for that? there seems to me to be a lot of land there that's really not being used for anything very much. And if it's being leased out, for movie theaters, which I think it's a sort of a long-term lease for, the movie structure there, that sort of seems to me to be implicit, the kind of an agreement that, or a concession that we don't really need this for shipping.
Right. Well, of course, we don't
So,
have, we're
so
not
if
New
you don't need it
York,
for
right?
shipping, well, maybe we should be, thinking about some other more maritime-oriented use for it. Because a big concrete building for films seems to me to be not probably the best thing to do with it.
Right. Well,
Anyway,
we're not New York or Montreal, so we don't have a subway that goes under the water. But of
yeah,
course, I mean, Roosevelt Island in New York has both an aerial tram and a subway,
yeah,
right?
Roosevelt Island. Yeah, that people who were on that talk will remember our discussion. It was great. We had a guy who was an engineer on the trolley, the not trolley. What's the word?
It's an
Gondola.
aerial tram, yeah,
Yeah,
aerial
the
tram.
aerial tram to Roosevelt Island in the East River of New York, and I mean it's. Uh, Does that make any sense? I don't know. I threw it out because we were talking about a bridge in that talk, and a bridge seemed a little bit far out, maybe partly because you need to have a really high bridge because ships go under there, and also because the footprint for a bridge is necessarily going to be very large, and maybe it's not feasible. And if you really, really did want to have a fixed link over the Eastern Gap, then one possibility, and how no, I don't know how wacky it is or doesn't make any sense at all, would conceivably be to do what New York did, which is to have a kind of an aerial
Right.
tram
Well,
because it doesn't occupy the same footprint and
yeah.
it's about the same amount of water, I think, roughly. So I don't know if that's
And actually, and I can't remember the gentleman's name right now, but he has his firm worked on when they refurbished it about 10, 15, 20 years ago when they refurbished the aerial tram. His firm had the contract for
yeah,
it, and
yeah,
as
so
he pointed out, he actually said, an aerial tram is would be significantly less expensive than the kind of bridge you would have to, as you just said, the kind of bridge you would have to build.
yeah,
Even if you wanted to. Um, Mind you, there's also a subway that connects Roosevelt Island to Brooklyn and Manhattan, because of
yeah.
course
So
You've
I don't
got
know when you're
Brooklyn
going
on
to
the
get
other
that. A
side.
subway stop on the island is I don't know if that's in our immediate, and I don't think that's in any immediate planning, but you never know. One day,
One
Florida's.
day. Well, yes, and we don't have a huge population center on the other side of the water, which of course is and same with Montreal. Obviously, there's a something, the subway goes under the St. Lawrence River.
Yeah.
Um, so
So great. I guess Ron, I'm going to ask you this question, but I'm pretty sure you don't know the answer because I don't think any of us know the answers. And that is, when do you think, or when does anybody know that the new Jack Layton ferry might actually materialize? Do you have any information on that at all? We've
No.
seen the plans. It's been about 10 years, I'd say at least, now that we've been thinking about it, and we,
Sure,
nobody seems to
certainly.
have any information as far as I know about
Am
that.
I nominating new board members? Is that
oh,
how I
hang
should
on.
officially put this forward in the AGM?
Can you mute yourself, please? Side conversation. Thanks.
I don't know. I think that the new ferry terminal was a design competition without a budget. And I don't know if that has changed, right?
I haven't heard that there's a budget for it. Yeah.
No.
No. Um,
Right.
Sorry, and let's remind everyone, when do we think that the first electric ferry is going to be in service? What's the current promise on that?
First electric ferries is scheduled to be in about a year from now.
About a year from now.
Yeah.
Right. So before the Eglinton Crosstown opens. So
Yeah.
so,
Before people drift away, I think it's worth pointing out that there's going to be another Waterfront for All speaker series session coming up fairly soon in December the 9th. And we're going to be talking about, okay, you're on to it. Exhibition place.
yes, we're having an exhibition place. Thank you, Ron. That was a great segue. So yes, join us again. We will probably bombard you with emails. Yes, so December 9th, featuring Don Boyle, who's the CEO of Exhibition Place. And we'll be talking about what the current plans are. Some of you may have noticed in the media there was some what sounds like rumors, machinations, possibilities that the provincial government may be up to something. I'm sure we'll have some questions about that. We may have more information about that by the 9th, in which case we perhaps can address that to some extent, depending on what we know for certain. But yes, so it'll be, because of course, Exhibition Place, as you know, is on the waterfront, and it's one of our largest public spaces in the city of Toronto. And it's something that many of our Waterfront for All members are, especially those our friends in Parkdale and Liberty, are very, very, very focused on, understandably. So we look forward to that, and we hope that many of you will join us for that. I'm going to make the pitch that we always make, which is that we operate mostly on, imagination, civic faith, and so if you feel that you're in a position to help us out with a modest donation, we always welcome that. We have a page on our website that you can go to, which I'll just share right now, just so you see it, so you know. And we are not a registered charity. We are just a nonprofit group, so we unfortunately cannot offer you. We can't offer you a tax receipt. But we can do is, and we voted on this last year, where we are now, originally we started out with organizational memberships, which we still have, and we were thrilled and pleased to have a variety of community groups like the York Key Neighborhood Association, among many others, as organizational members. But last year we said that if you gave $20 annually or more, or more, we would make you an individual member, and we would, and so if you've already donated as much as you can, and it's $20 or more in the past year, then you will be invited to have a vote at our AGM, which is upcoming in the first quarter of 2026. We haven't got an exact date on that yet, but it will be sometime in the first 3 months of 2026. And we would appreciate anyone, and so we welcome you to be a member. And of course, we also will also think of anyone who's enjoyed this programming or enjoyed the speaker series we do and the events we do, and the issues we like to highlight. We'll also welcome people to sit on our board of directors as well, which is something we can vote on at the AGM. If you have a burning desire to join us in a committee capacity, or please get in touch with us. You can email us. You can contact us. You can reach me at edward@edwardnixon.com. You can and I will pass it on to the board. And thank you, everyone, for attending. If anyone has any further questions or comments they'd like to share now, we would be thrilled. I'm just going to check the chat.
I'd like to thank the audience members for their attention and questions.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't assume that what interests me is interesting to other people, but sometimes people stick around for a talk, and that's great.
Well, we had we had 99 people at our max tonight. We still have 62 hanging in there with us, which is great, because you know what? When you have free events, which our events are always free, usually, about 50 to 60% of the RSVPs usually turn up. That's just something I've noticed over many, many years of doing events when they're free. And we still have greater than 50% of the people who signed up. So that is amazing. And I'm really, really thankful for everyone who came. Yes, we will. We being an all-volunteer organization with a variety of impingements and constraints and demands on our lives, we aren't always super fast getting things posted up to our website, because we do have to edit this video a bit. We have to trim things and play around with it a bit, and then turn it into a YouTube-friendly format. But yes, indeed, within the not-so-distant future, this will join our list of speaker series that are on the website. For those of you who are still here, maybe I should just also share that page too, eh? Maybe I should share that page. So I'll just show you this. Now I think we are missing a couple. We're missing a couple of events we still need to get up there, but I will share that. So this is also on our website, recordings of speaker series. So there's a bunch of here going back to 2021. And again, there's probably a couple that are still missing, but most of our events, we do record them. They get up here in due course, and they are on YouTube as well. But these are direct links to the YouTube videos. So
We
thank you
usually
for,
get the deck up there pretty fast because
yeah, so we have a deck. We also
deck we
share the,
usually get up within
exact.
a day or so. So we'll probably get that up soon, next couple of days.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for that, Ed, because Ed's right. Of course, putting up a slide deck is is simpler than putting up a video. So yes, the slide deck and the video in due course will be out there. So I really appreciate that. And
Okay.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Roger.
Hopefully,
Great talk.
hopefully we'll see you on December 9th.
Bye-bye.
Bonsoir.